Hey folks, this is going to be a real quick one. I just want to cover what we do in the case when secant is given to us or cotangent is given to us, not in terms of a number, but in terms of these clues about what sign it is, positive or negative. And we can use these clues to figure out what quadrant we're dealing with. And you see that's the main question in this one. It says the terminal side of theta lies in quadrant blank. And it's based on the sign of the cosecant, positive or negative, and whether secant is positive or negative. And we can use that information with our unit circle to figure this out. Now, you may be thinking, well, unit circle is great, right? Here's my unit circle. I know that in quadrant 1, sine of theta is positive and cosine of theta is positive. And you maybe haven't thought about cotangent or secant or any of those things. But we can use sine and cosine information from our unit circle to draw some conclusions about cotangent and secant and all the other trig functions, right? Think about this for a moment. If sine is positive and cosine is positive, then how about I write this correctly? How about tangent of theta? Well, that's just equal to sine over cosine, right? Now, if sine of theta and cosine of theta are both positive, that means in quadrant 1, tangent of theta is positive. And over here, tangent of theta is going to be negative in quadrant 2. In quadrant 3, it'll be a negative divided by a negative, right? Sine and cosine are both negative, so that makes tangent positive again. And in quadrant 4, tangent of theta is going to be negative. And it doesn't matter if theta is 300 degrees or 315 or 330 or 347 degrees, right? It's just going to be a negative number when you tangent it. All right, that was tangent. Let's do another example with secant. Okay, if I say secant of theta, well, secant of theta is 1 over cosine. Now, think about this. If cosine is positive, 1 divided by that is going to be positive. You can't do 1 divided by a positive number and get a negative number, right? So I'm going to say my secant, actually, let's just make some more room here. My secant values in quadrant 1 are going to be positive. And in quadrant 4, they're going to be positive. And the reason I jumped right over to quadrant 4 is because I'm looking at this whole side of the unit circle as positive x values. And if x values are positive, then cosine is positive and secant is also positive. And way over here, if I have secant theta in quadrants 2 and 3, well, these are all negative x values, right? Negative x values means negative cosine values means negative secant values. And likewise, if we want to try cosecant theta, well, that's the y values, right? Or sine of theta is the y values. Cosecant is the reciprocal of sine. So we're talking about 1 divided by the y values. But if they're positive, who cares? Cosecant is going to be positive. So we get cosecant theta positive in the upper portions, and cosecant of theta is going to be negative in the lower quadrants. So that's a good way to think about this one. And you see, now when we're talking about this, these clues, I can say, oh, secant positive, that means x is going to be positive. Cosecant positive, that means y is going to be positive. So therefore, this is quadrant 1. Cotangent less than 0. Well, okay, that means I'm either in quadrant 2 or quadrant 4. That's where tangent and cotangent are both negative. Secant less than 0, though? That's going to be, what are those? Secant is related to the x values. It's, well, more accurately, 1 over the x values. 1 over x is less than 0. That means x is less than 0. That means quadrants 2 and quadrants 3. Now, in quadrants 2 and 3, or in quadrants 2 and 4, what does that point us to? Well, it means quadrant 2. It's the only one they have in common. One more example, then we'll be done. Tangent greater than 0. Well, that's going to be quadrants 1 and quadrants 3, right? Those are the only places where tangent is positive. You can see I actually did that example here. Tangent positive in quadrants 1 and 3. So secant negative, we just talked about that one. If x is negative, that means 1 over x is negative. That means secant is negative in quadrants, that's on the left side, 2 and 3. Well, the only one in common is, whoops, it's not 2. It's going to be 3. Okay, so that would be quadrant 3.